Hello and welcome to the ACE LiveClass Continuing Education Series. My name is Jackie Crockford. Welcome to your continuing education class for today. I will be your host for today's presentation, Integrated Exercise Implementation. So for today's course, we have a great presenter, Justin Robinson.
Happy to be here.
Hi.
Thank you.
So Justin has been with us before for the live classes, and usually as the dietitian speaking to us about nutrition, but today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. Justin, you have a background in sports, strength and conditioning, personal training, so you are the co-owner of Venn Performance,
Correct.
right? So tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking with you about today, and then we'll get going.
Well, today should be a great, combination of practical and textbook experience, if we will. So we'll go through some slides, we'll get some information. We have our model here, our workout guy who's gonna come out and we'll demonstrate some exercises. But it's really just how to take that textbook information and apply it, make it your own.
Great, great. So we are gonna be taking the information that you are talking about today around the IFT model, the ACE IFT model,
Correct.
And applying it kind of in this 3D, and we've talked about 3D from a nutrition standpoint,
Absolutely.
but now 3D from an exercise standpoint. So hopefully that'll be some great information for you all to take back to your clients. So before we get started with that, just a reminder that you are watching today for free on your YouTube stream. So if you would like to receive CECs for today's presentation, you can do that by using the link that is below your viewer, and you can purchase CECs, and those will go into your My ACE account after you've passed the quiz. Also, if you have questions for Justin today as we go through the presentation, there is a chat box. So that should show up on the right-hand side of your viewer. Feel free to chat in any questions that you have, or if you have any technical issues, feel free to type in there as well. And because we are live today, if you are joining us and you're watching us live, you can rewind and go back if you want to see something again. And then if you're watching the recorded version, that will go into your My ACE account after you've made that purchase for CECs. So Justin, I'll turn it over to you and
Awesome.
we'll get started.
All right, thank you very much. And before we get too much into the details today, on a side note, I am a contracted employee through the Department of Defense, but I'm here under my own accord today, so anything I say or present is entirely my own opinion. So with that, let's get going on what we're going to discuss this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you may be. So today's really about tools. It's really about taking the development side of an exercise program. I feel too often we get too much into the what to do without focusing on the why. So there's the old story of teach a man how to fish and feed him for a lifetime. Well, today we are teaching you how to fish rather than just serving fish on a platter. So we'll talk about how we can develop a skeleton program and how that makes the implementation of exercises much easier on the trainer. And then we'll talk about a three-dimensional approach, both on a large scale and small scale, how we can progress exercises to make them three-dimensional. So on that note, as Jackie mentioned, we have the 3D nutrition course where we talked about nutrition intake, nutrition storage and nutrition output. We talked about behavior, exercise, and nutrition. On a very global scale, we could talk about mind, body, spirit, and how each one of those entities is important in developing an exercise weight loss program. And as we'll discuss today, on a smaller scale, we can talk about sagittal, front to back, frontal, which is the side-to-side movement, and then the transversal, which is that rotational movement. So we'll take that ACE IFT model and apply it to 3D. The ACE IFT model, we won't have time today to get into the cardiorespiratory phases there, but we definitely will go through each of those functional training ones and how we can go from that phase 1 to phase 4, how we establish that rapport and keep that continuing along that whole spectrum of exercise progression. And if you haven't done so already, ACE does offer this as a free CEU. So at least an hour from now if you haven't done it. Don't go there right now because we have a lot of fun stuff to get to. So one of the 3D applications to this would be what I call assess, develop, and implement. So we assess the client, we figure out their strengths and their weaknesses, where they want to go with things, what his or her goals are. we develop a program that's goal-oriented, and then we let them exercise, and we guide them through exercise, create an environment where we can have specificity, overload, and progression so that they enjoy the workout, and most importantly, so that they can see results. It's important to note here that this is not necessarily a linear progression, that once you get to the implementation, you don't just stay there. You may and you should have to reassess essentially every single workout. So these 3 steps, as we'll see, are a little bit more fluid than just steps 1, 2, and 3. So exercise assessment. The exercise is the assessment is the exercise. I didn't come up with that quote, but I love it. Gary Gray, one of my mentors, came up with that idea, and essentially what that means is that we don't just put our clients into a lab, run a whole bunch of tests on them, take that information, and then start exercising. We'll sit down, we'll go through the PAR-Q, health history, all of those necessary steps, and then we just essentially turn them loose and we let them work out. We let them enjoy the movement, and with our trained eye, we assess them as they're exercising. And so we'll get into that a little bit in just a moment here. So what we want to figure out during our assessment, which is both qualitative and quantitative, we want to figure out what the client does well, and we want to find that boundary between failure and success. So if you have a warm-up routine or an assessment and everything is easy and they crush it, you're maybe not quite doing your job. So we're going to bring out Hector here now, and we're going to go through a few basic exercises. Just for time's sake, we want to go through an entire assessment. But along the lines of the functional movement screen, if you're familiar with that, which is a combination of that qualitative and quantitative assessment, we're going to pick a few exercises from there, modify them just a little bit. So we're going to start off with just a body weight squat. So you can go ahead and just put that heavy bar there, piece of PVC pipe behind your neck there. So good squat technique. I'm not going to give him too many cues because I want to see how he moves. And again, I'm assessing him as he's doing this. So just keep your heels flat, pretend like there's a chair behind you, and go ahead and give us a couple reps. All right, good. Let's go ahead and face the camera just so they can see a different vantage point. As a trainer, when I'm going through exercises with clients, I like to get different views so I can see what's going on. And we can see a couple things here. So let's go ahead and hold it for a moment. All right, let's keep that chest up nice and tall, and let's just rotate your knees out slightly as you squat. Beautiful. All right, so you can see those simple cues, and I would say that's a success. That's if every client has a squat that looks like that. If you want to do the FMS, I'll write that as a 3 out of 3, and then we'll move on to the next one, all right? So let's go ahead and go to an overhead squat now. Okay. So extend the elbows overhead, keep that bar just over the crown of the back of your head there, about over your ears, perfect. And let's just do that exact same squat. Good. And if you see a little bit of shaking, a little bit of imbalance, that's still all right. So what I like to do too is let the client go through a few repetitions before you provide feedback. Because sometimes just as they go from repetition 1 to repetition 4, they're going to be neuromuscularly charged up or neuromuscularly warm. All right, so perfect there. All right, that looks great. What I would say on the challenge there, if you saw that, is his hands were a little bit forward. So in my notes, I would say, all right, we probably need to focus on external shoulder rotation. Maybe we need to focus a little bit on that thoracic mobility, which 99 out of 100 clients have to work on. All right, so hip mobility looks great. Hip stability, lower body strength looks great. Again, maybe we need to focus a little bit more on that thoracic area. All right, last one here. Let's just go ahead and go with a lunge. So I'm just going to have you lunge forward, reach the bar to knee height, and then come back, and we can just alternate those. So again, I'm looking for a quality of movement. I'm looking for mobility. I'm looking for stability or strength. All right, well done there. Let's just, one correction. Let's try to keep that back leg straight as you're going forward. There you go. So what I'm assessing there is not only his strength or his stability in that front hip, but I'm looking at the mobility or the flexibility of that back hip. Let's go ahead and do a couple facing the camera there. All right, you see, let's try to keep that knee a little bit more straight there. I'm okay with the knee going down and in a little bit since that is a real life functional movement, but what I'm looking for is the control of that. So if I see that knee going down and in just as he's doing now with some control, again, that's fine. But go ahead and just for fun, go ahead and let that knee dive down and in. Yeah, if I see that, that tells me that's his failure point, all right? So what I'm gonna do is as we'll go in later today, I'm gonna back off a little bit. I'm gonna decrease range of motion or speed, or I'm gonna give him a different cue. All right, looks good so far. So after this brief assessment, I think what we need to probably work on, I would say his target, what I'm gonna focus on in my development is gonna be that upper back, all right? Because like most of us, a lot of people probably sit and do this a lot during the day, so that thoracic spine gets tight, those shoulders get internally rotated, so shoulder extension, thoracic extension and mobility are keys. Lower body looks pretty good. We can focus on a little bit of strength there, general strength, but my target's going to be there. All right, thank you. We'll bring Hector back out in a few minutes here. So that was a brief overview of assessment. And once again, what we're trying to do with that is figure out what your client does well and where you want to go with things. This is on a kind of off target here just a little bit. I came across this link, and you can see the link down there, and it was discussing business organizations and how every part of a business has to do its job in order for that entire organization to be successful. And I think that's a great analogy to the body, that if you have that tight upper thoracic spine, that's going to put stress on the low back. That's going to put stress on the knees. So from your big toe all the way up through your left ear, if each segment is not doing its designed role, then that's when we get dysfunction. That's when we get pain. So when we assess, we have to assess head to toe. And if a client comes to you with low back pain, in my opinion, the worst thing you can do is only focus on the low back. Sure, you have to give them some low back stretches to temporarily relieve that pain. But if you're not also focusing on their ankles, their knees, their hips, all throughout their spine and their shoulders, you may be doing that client a disservice. So just an interesting link there as a side note. To summarize assessment, build rapport. So assuming we went through our health history and everything, and I know Hector's goals, that's where I would start our warm-up, and that's where I'd start our exercise with some of those basic body weight movements. So I'm looking at those movement patterns to see where and how I want to challenge Hector. Again, it's both qualitative and quantitative, so I'm not just having him do a max squat or max reps of push-ups. Great information, but they don't tell the whole story. Small tests to indicate readiness, so if his first few lunges and he's really coming too far forward with that forward flexion, and then just by some cueing or after a few weeks I see him keeping that taller spine, so to speak, or shoulders back, now I know he's ready to go on to that next movement or that next progression. And the testing does not have to be rigid or formalized. Again, we don't want to make our clients lab rats and stick them into a room and do a whole bunch of tests and then just spit out data that nobody's ever going to use. So do the test and then use that information. Moving on to development, that second step. You see my beautiful daughter Reese here on the screen, and she's almost 4 years old, so she's in her why stage. So every day, every question is why daddy, why daddy, why daddy? Those of you who are parents are probably shaking your head, yeah, I've been there before. And I feel that as coaches, as trainers, we need to be able to answer why. Our clients should be those 4-year-olds who are asking us why constantly. So if you are doing a particular exercise with a client and some random person comes in and asks you, well, why are you doing that? And if you can't answer them instantly, you need to go back to the drawing board. So how do we develop that? How do we answer the why? In my opinion, this is the most important step. We should not do anything else unless we can do this, because it makes the implementation, the picking out the exercises, incredibly easy. How we do that is we develop a skeleton, and here's an example of that. So on one end of the spectrum, we have a very typical, a very structured routine. You could think of the collegiate strength and conditioning program a few years back, where You did your bench, you did your squat, you did your deadlift, your RDL, your clean, your snatch. You did those exercises every week. You progressed, you got to put on 5 more pounds every time you did that exercise, and over the course of 6 months, you got stronger. So it's very, very easy to calculate. It's very, very easy to see those results. On the other end of the spectrum, we have every day is fun boot camp day, where we're running around, we're throwing medicine balls, we're playing with sport cords, we're just having a lot of fun, breaking a sweat. The only drawback to that is it's hard to calculate your variables there, so how much intensity or how much load you're adding to the system. And clients don't always see the results. They'll go to a boot camp class and maybe come back 5 or 10 weeks later, and it's pretty much the same workout. So yeah, it's great to expend some energy and to have fun, but it's not where the results are. So what we're looking for is that sweet spot. How do we have enough variety so that clients enjoy the activity and they keep coming back to you so you could feed your family, but yet how do we have enough structure in there so that the client sees results? And this is how we achieve that. So I like to say we do the same thing, but different. So we do a lot of squats, but it's not the exact same back squat every single session. And again, it's that balance between variety and structure. It's based on the assessment. Once again, their needs, their goals, their strengths, their weaknesses. So in looking at what we were doing with Hector there, lower body strength, in my opinion, would just be general conditioning. My emphasis would really be on that upper back. So I would make sure that I have upper body rotational exercises. I'd make sure I'm addressing those in my warm-up every single session. And here's how we can progress. Here's how we can do the same thing, but different. So we can just pick 3 exercises for example. We could pick a squat, a lunge, and a push. And that's our A, B, and C. So in week 1, we're just going to pick 3 exercises. In week 2, we're going to have that same format, but we're going to pick 3 different exercises based on those 3 movement patterns. And then week 3, we're still going to do the same movement patterns, but it'll be a different exercise. So my purpose remains the same, but my implementation differs. Here's an example of that. So if I have a bilateral squat, which means that both of my feet are moving together, I'm just sitting down onto that chair. Week 1, I could use a goblet squat. Week 2, I could choose my barbell back squat. Week 3, I could do a kettlebell deadlift. They're all flexion and extension of the ankles, knees, and hips, but it's 3 different exercises. And what I could do is week 4, I could go back to that goblet squat, and then that's when I can progress. I can make the movement faster. I can obviously increase the weight of that kettlebell. I can increase the range of motion, a number of different factors that we're going to get into in a couple slides. I won't go through each of these in detail just because I want to get to showing you some of these, but you can see the different movement patterns: single leg hip hinge, push, pull, rotate, and then you could see 3 different examples or progressions of each of those, 3 different varieties of each of those, a better way to describe that. So these movement patterns are what I deemed important for my client based on my assessment. Another day of the week, again, movement patterns that I deem important for my client: single leg or unilateral squat, a hip hinge movement, unilateral push, so a 1-arm push, a bilateral pull, and then another rotational ab or core exercise, however you like to coin that. And then once again, weeks 1, 2, and 3. And to keep it very simple, what I would do is week 4 would also be a lunge. It would just be a higher progression, a more challenging lunge. Implementation. And this is the easy part. This is reaching into a bag and pulling out a couple exercises. I think intuitively, this is where we start, however. I remember being a younger personal trainer, strength and conditioning coach, going to different conferences and seeing some really, really great speakers. And they would get on stage and they would show us a warm-up routine or an agility or plyometric routine. And my eyes would just get really big, and I'd run home the next week, and what were all of my clients doing? They were doing that warm-up routine, those plyometric exercises, and those agility exercises. And I wasn't wrong in doing that, but I didn't address the why. It was just a great tool, a great technique, a great implementation of an exercise, but the understanding wasn't necessarily there. So my challenge to you and my goal as I'm developing programs is to really come up with that why so that we can implement the implementation becomes relatively easy. So as I said, this is the typical focus of most people's programming. And it's very easy if the first two steps, assess and development, are done properly. All right, now the fun part. Actually taking some of this information and demonstrating how we can progress different exercises along the IFT model from mobility and stability all the way up to sports performance. Briefly, these are some of the variables that you can manipulate in order to make an exercise more challenging. I typically start with stability or points of contact. We have 4 potential points of contact. Our feet on the ground and maybe our hands on a wall or holding on to parallel bars, for example. Load or weight is the one we focus on very most often or very commonly. And you can see some of the other ones there that we can make the exercise faster. We can make things a little bit more chaotic. And then we can also, what we call tweak in or tweak out particular exercises, giving muscle groups some helpers or taking those helpers away and maybe challenging some of those smaller muscle groups, as we'll demonstrate. All right, let's bring Hector back out here. So let's start off with a push-up progression. How are you doing today, by the way?
Great.
All right, awesome. All right. See, building rapport there continually. All right. So with the push-up development, we're going to start off with the plank. So let's just go ahead down into a plank position there. And I like a dynamic plank. So for this one, there's 1,000 different ways you can modify this exercise. We're just going to do a shoulder touch. So right hand to the left shoulder, left hand to the right shoulder. And he's just going to alternate his touches there. All right, great. What I'm going to have you do now is try to keep the hips and that lower part of your core stable. There you go. So now I'm challenging him in a little different way. So once again, we're looking at mobility and stability. I'm looking at the strength, some of the mobility in his shoulders there, but I'm also looking at some of the stability going on throughout that posterior chain, throughout his hamstrings, his glutes, his low back. All right, perfect. So that could be level 1. We can do the same thing with the legs. Keep the hands still and move the legs. We can reach forward in that sagittal plane, sideways in that frontal plane, or under, or do some rotation in the transverse plane as well. All right, let's move on to the T-stability push-up. And on the screen there it says incline. So if you want to make this slightly easier, you could put your client onto a 24-inch box and have him do push-ups that way. But he's a stud. So we're going to go with the T-stability push-up here. So it's a push-up to a reach. Some people call these push-up airplanes, however you want to phrase that. All right, I'm going to challenge him a little bit more. Try to reach a little bit farther back as you reach up and back. There we go. So now we get that nice lengthening through the core as we reach back. Perfect. All right, last challenge, just make it a little bit more fluid. There we go. As soon as that hand touches, you're going right into that next push-up. Great. All right, awesome job. And you can see without changing the exercise, without moving a pin on our machine, all he did was go a little bit faster, and that became a more challenging exercise. So once again, the exercise is the assessment is the exercise. If he was going too fast and his form broke down, I'd back off a little bit, have him slow down. If he was crushing it like he was, let's go faster. Let's challenge you a little bit more there. So the next part of the progression, and I'll hop in on this one, is what we call partner push-up matrix. So this is really fun for groups, or especially like high school or collegiate teams here. So we're going to face each other in that push-up position, and we're in between each push-up, we're just going to give a high five. So we're going to start with the right hand here, and then go left, and then we're going to go down low, and we'll go up high with the opposite, boom, up high with the opposite. All right, one more time. Forward, forward, down low, up high. All right, awesome. And you can see that even after 2 rounds of that, we're both good to go, all right? So something like that, 30 seconds, move on to a lower body, and then you can get mobility, stability, and then obviously, apparently, a little bit of metabolic conditioning as well. So that's our push-up progression. All right, moving on to squat progression. First one we're going to do here, we're going to introduce some load early on, even though our focus is still mobility and stability, but he's just going to hold a kettlebell. So this is called a goblet squat. So feet about shoulder width apart, heels down, pretend like there's a chair behind you, just sit down onto that chair. Perfect. So just give me about 3 or 4 reps. All right. Perfect. So with that, again, I'm assessing him as he's doing this in his workout. That was great. The next time we do these, even in the next set, I would have to challenge him there because that was what it was supposed to look like. All right, so that challenge, here we go. Ready for that?
Yeah.
We're going to go with a 3D goblet squat. So 3D just means that we're going to modify this in 3 planes of motion. So that first one we're going to do is going to be sagittal plane. So let's just go a little staggered stance, all right? And I want you to keep most of your weight on that left foot. So let's go ahead and squat down there. So both legs are still moving together just like a squat. And you can see he instinctively slowed down a little bit. So that means he's having to think about it. Perfect. Let's go right foot forward, and we'll just do 2 reps of each.
Sounds good.
All right. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and turn face the camera. We're going to tweak in that frontal plane, so we're going to go feet together. All right. Make it narrow. Good. And once again, if the knees are coming down and in a little bit, that's okay, as long as it's a controlled movement. All right, let's go wide. Perfect. All right, we'll do one more plane of motion. And now what we're going to do is back to hip width or shoulder width, toes out a little bit. Still keeping the weight through the heels. Perfect. Great range of motion there. All right, last one. The most awkward of the bunch. Let's transverse plane modification. Turn those toes in and get the squat from there.
All right.
All right, so this one I actually want to encourage. Go ahead and let those knees go down and in a little bit. Just control that movement. There you go. So with the whole always lunge straight forward. All right, perfect. You can go ahead and catch your breath here for a second. Keep the knee directly over that second toe. That's great in a very controlled environment, but real life is not controlled. So used to work with a lot of baseball players, and one of the guys who was a speedster on the team, he's like, oh yeah, coach, but when I lunge, don't I want to keep my knee directly over the toe? And I said, well, do this for me. Next time you're legging out a triple and that right foot hits second base, and I want you to tell your knee not to go down and in. And he's like, okay, I got it. So what we should do is in a controlled environment, teach those muscles how to go down and in. Teach them how to go into that varus and into that valgus position, and then we can slowly build speed so that when you do step awkwardly playing flag football with your friends on the weekend, you don't tear an ACL. All right, we can go ahead and I'll take that, and we'll get our loaded bar here. So we're moving on to a back squat. So we're going to add load, external load to the system here, and just assume there's a couple plates on there, and just do a squat. So anytime we progress in one area, we typically back off in another. So the 3-dimensional foot modification is a progression. Added weight is a progression. So I don't want to add both of those together. So I back off on one while I add another. All right, that looks great. The last one we're going to do is now we're going to take the load away, but now we're going to add acceleration and deceleration to the exercise. We're going to make it increase the speed of movement. So we're going to do a jump squat. So feet somewhere between hip, shoulder width, down, arms back, jump up as high as you can, but then land as softly as you can. Great. Soft landing. Good. All right, well done. So now we're making that into more of a plyometric, and once again, we can throw a medicine ball at him while he's doing that. We can create some chaos and just try to have some fun at certain points. All right, let's look at the hip hinge movement and how we can progress that. So the first one we're going to choose here is a good morning with the band. So around the neck, step into it there. Come stand up nice and tall. All right, good. So what he's gonna do here, now the hip hinge is not a squat. A lot of the times when people are doing RDLs or when they're doing kettlebell swings, they're squatting. And in the ACE IFT model, we talk about bend and lift. And what we're doing is essentially separating those into two movements here, into that squat and into the hip hinge. So the hip hinge, the knee should be slightly bent, but fixed, and all the movement is coming from the waist. So perfect. Let's go ahead and do about 4 or 5 reps of that. All right, well done. So his knees are bending just a tiny bit, but I'm okay with that. And so what we're looking for here, so let's keep that those shoulder blades squeezed together. So if you see a breakdown in form, sometimes they need a cue, just like, hey, keep your shoulder blades together, and he does it. Or it could mean that the client is fatiguing, and then once again, you've reached that threshold that, hey, all right, go ahead and take a break.
Thanks.
Yeah, that maybe I should give a little more rest from one exercise to the next, or maybe 4 or 5 repetitions is his threshold for this training session. All right, let's move on from the banded exercise there to the standard RDL. So now the weight is in front of him, and once again, this is a loaded bar. So keep the weight, essentially brush it down your thighs and your shins, keeping it very close to the body, and it's still just that hip hinge movement. Heels down, knees slightly flexed but stiff, all the movements coming from the waist. Perfect. All right. All right, keep that bar close to the shins. Good. Good, so a little bit less knee bend. Really lock those knees out as you're bending forward. Really give me a good hamstring stretch. There you go. So that's what I like to see. Now, the reason we have this as the step beyond the good morning or beyond the banded exercise, even though this might look easier, is because it's very, very common, very easy for clients to round their back. So show us the rounded back. So you'll see this all the time. As soon as people get a weight here, this is what they want to do. So having that band or taking a dowel, in this case, go ahead and stand up, and putting that behind their neck essentially forces the client to keep that nice, firm posture. Because what we're doing, once again, mobility and stability. Mobility of the hamstrings and the hips, stability of the thoracic and lumbar spine. All right, great. Let's turn this into a little bit more of a movement activity now. And we're going to do what we call RDL walks. So I'll have you come start over here. We've got a couple kettlebells. Dumbbells work too. I think these handles are a little bit easier. So he's just going to step on one leg, reach forward. Once again, bending at the waist, keeping those weights relatively close to the body. And then there you go, perfect. So slightly bent but fixed knee, moving at the hip. And if he's got a little bit of that rotation in there, I'm okay with that. That could be one thing that we work on. Perfect. All right, so just go to about knee height. You don't have to reach them very far. Okay. Just get a light stretch in that hamstring. There you go, and then come back up. So the exercise is the assessment. The assessment is the exercise. I'm finding out his threshold. Week 1, you can set those down. Thanks. Week 1, his range of motion is just to knee height, all right? Week 3, week 4, he's going to reach those all the way to the ground. Then he's going to do those back and forth a little bit faster, all right? Then we're going to increase the weight of the kettlebells, but once we do increase the weight, maybe we go back to that knee reach. So it's that constant evolution, constant progression there. All right, so the last exercise progression we have here is we're going to go back to the loaded bar. See, I can just set those down.
Thanks.
Go back to the loaded bar. So he's got some weight on here, and he's going to go into a single leg toe touch position. So 80 or 90% of his weight's on one foot, and that other foot is really just there for balance. So now if in our assessment I saw that his left hip was a little bit weaker compared to the right or less mobile, this is the type of exercise where I can start to create more balance. Perfect. There you go. So this one may look a little bit easier, but is this more challenging?
Yeah.
Let's just go ahead and keep all the reps on one leg here for now. Let's just do 3 or so right there. Perfect. And as he's coming back up, I'm just looking for that hip extension too, all right? So come back up, stand up nice and tall in between every rep. Perfect. All right, there it is. Again, he does make this look easy with just a dowel, but put a regular barbell behind the neck there, and this exercise definitely becomes more challenging. All right, how you doing so far?
Good.
Good, all right.
Little breather soon.
All right, I'm gonna hit a little breather. All right, go ahead. Actually, yeah,
Thanks.
we'll give him a little bit of a rest here. We're gonna finish off going through a complete lunge progression, but before we get to that, I just wanna show you or discuss a few different exercises, how we can modify and progress a row. So you can go from just a banded row to more of a suspension type of pull-up, changing the angle there a little bit. Then you can come back to a row with a cable or with a band, and you could tweak your foot position. So once again, that frontal sagittal transverse plane, and now I'm changing what my hips are doing and how they're assisting the core and how they're assisting the upper body in those exercises. And then I can eventually go to a one-arm suspension, and if you can actually do it, eventually some form of a one-arm type of pull-up. With the wood chop or our rotational exercise, we can start kneeling. So we're taking out the lower body. And then we can come and do that same type of exercise in a split stance or in standing. So now we're having to incorporate the lower body there a little bit more. Then we could do the same one on a single leg, really challenging our balance now. The word balance gets thrown around a lot. If you want to challenge balance, the best thing you can do is just stand on one leg. All right? You don't need fancy equipment, don't necessarily need an unstable surface to challenge balance. Just stand on one foot and try and do what you were doing before. And then we can increase our speed of movement once again and get some medicine ball throws going. All right, our last one, or our last progression here, and we'll take you through everything on this. So we'll start off with a very basic day one or day two after an ACL injury type of lunge, all the way up to prepping for NFL Combine. I want to make sure my body's ready to go for anything that's thrown at me, explosive type of lunge. All right, so go ahead and come back out. I'm going to grab some water myself. So let's start off with just 1 foot forward, and we're going to do what we call a static lunge. So the only thing that's really moving here is he's just driving his knee forward a little bit. Go ahead and reach the knee and then come back. So he's not stepping out with this. It's just that static lunge there. Good. So now we're going to go into a dynamic lunge. Same thing, but we're going to step and then return.
Okay.
Perfect. And you can alternate legs. I think from a chaotic type of standpoint, from his cognitive and physical working together, it's probably easier to do one leg at a time. Something as simple as having your client alternate is a form of a progression. All right, perfect. Because we don't want to get you too tired, because we got a ways to go. All right, so now we're going to add just a dowel here. Just add a little bit of momentum to the exercise. And let's go ahead and face forward so we can get a little different view here. So just still that alternating lunge. We're going to reach the knee, and this time we're going to come back to an overhead press.
Okay.
There it is. So if my focus is on movement, I would do this with a PVC. I would do this with maybe some 5-pound dumbbells or a really light medicine ball. As you'll see here in a moment, we're going to go to more of a loaded type of lunge as opposed to a movement-emphasized lunge. Great. All right. Let's do this. Let's make that three-dimensional. So let's just go ahead and get 2 or 3 reps to each side. Side lunge, overhead press, lunge to the other side. Come back to that overhead press. Good. And the key, one of the keys to this lunge is to keep the opposite leg straight. So let's go ahead and pause here for a moment. Nice work. You can see that this leg is getting a really nice stretch. The adductors on that side are getting a good stretch. Go ahead and go back. So we don't necessarily need to isolate and do the adductor machine to get a good hip workout. We can just do this frontal plane lunge. All right, nice work. Now let's go ahead and do the transverse one. So for standing in the middle of a big clock, you just lunged to 12. You went to 3. You went to 9. So let's come back here to about 4. And then we'll come back over here to about 8.
Okay.
Good. Come back to that press. Nice job. Reach the knee height or shin. See, he's progressing on his own. I like that. Good, Liz. On this last one, try not to let the foot on the ground. Try not to let that keep it planted. Glue that foot to the ground. Glue the entire foot to the ground. There we go. All right, better. All right, nice job. Too good of a job. So let's challenge it. We have a couple more ways that we can challenge this now. So the next part we're going to do is take out some of the helpers. So in the lunge, we know that the quads and the glutes do the majority of the work. So we're going to take the glutes out of the exercise. We're going to challenge the glute medius a little bit more. We're going to challenge the quads a little bit more. So let's go and go just back to the forward lunge. But what I want you to do is to press overhead as you step and then come back to here. So we're pressing up and coming back. So lunge with a press as opposed to lunge to a press. Perfect. Good. All right, see, a little bit wobbly. I'm okay with that. And what we can do is we can slow it down, or if he continued, that was a good correction. If he continued to do that, we could just shorten the distance. So he could just go ahead and step a little bit closer to your body. All right? And that becomes a little bit of an easier, or in this case, looked like a much easier exercise. Way easier. All right. So, and that's the type of feedback we need. It's like, was that easier, harder, or the same? That was way easier. All right. So we need to go somewhere in between what was challenging and wobbly and what was way easy. That's that threshold. All right. Let's take this one step farther. So now we're going to add some external load to the system here. And for this first one, let's just go ahead and do a forward lunge, reach out to the knee, and then come back to that overhead press.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, that looks good. Let's go ahead and reach out to about mid-shin with that range of motion. There you go, good. And once again, you can see that as he steps forward, I'm looking at this back hip. I'm looking at the extension of that hip as well as the control in that front hip, the stability and the mobility. All right, perfect. All right, last one until the next one here.
Yeah.
So now we're going to lunge forward, but this time I want you to touch the medicine ball all the way to the ground. All right? And if you want to come back and just more of a swing overhead as opposed to a press, that'll work too.
Okay.
Touch the ground, overhead. Try not to bounce it too much. No cheating on my clock. All right, perfect. All right, so what we're going to do now, I want to challenge him even a little bit more. So we're going to take that lunge with a floor reach to an overhead swing. We're going to make that three-dimensional. So once again, we'll go forward, forward, side, side, back diagonal, floor, coming back to an overhead swing. We'll do this 4 times.
Easy.
We'll do easy, right? We'll do 2 relatively slow at your own pace, and then we'll do the last 2 as fast as you can with good form.
Okay.
Perfect. Forward, yeah, nice and controlled. All right, side, glue that foot to the ground. Good. Back diagonal, good. Knee straight, back diagonal. All right. We're there. Excellent. Good. Side, back diagonal. All right, let's go one more time, as fast as you can with good form. Let's go. Slam it down there, overhead. Good, slam it down, overhead, side. Good, back diagonal. All right, well done. Okay, awesome job.
Thanks, Justin.
All right, so the strength exercise is also the cardio exercise. The cardio exercise is the strength exercise. And something as simple as a lunge doesn't just have to be stepping forward with dumbbells and coming back. That a lunge could be, as I said, in parallel bars with 4 points of contact, getting just a couple degrees range of motion. I call that a lunge, all the way to what Hector just showed us here of taking a med ball, full range of motion, full speed, 3 planes of motion, and then I could maybe put a blindfold on him or do something else like that and make it a little bit more chaotic. So we have a full progression here, and it's really just about finding out where your client is doing well, and once again, pushing that threshold every single session or even every single set within that session. To summarize our 3-step approach, we assess, we develop a routine, we develop that skeleton of movement patterns, and then we implement exercises. Then we progress those exercises. As you're progressing, you're also reassessing. As you're reassessing, you may need to redevelop. You may need to constantly modify your program to make sure that they're getting the results and the variety that they desire. Likewise, with the IFT approach, just because you move on from phase 2 to phase 3 doesn't mean you never revisit phase 1 or phase 2. You have to revisit those. And in fact, in the training module, they talk about incorporating those into your warm-up. So the body weight squat or the squats with the dowel and those lunges, Hector's doing those in his warm-up every single session. But we're progressing to that lunge with the medicine ball very, very quickly. So you may have to backtrack a little bit. If somebody gets injured, maybe you go from that phase 4 to the phase 2, focus more on range of motion and movement training, and then you re-add the load as they progress. So it's very, very fluid. Just as establishing with rapport has to be constantly evolving, this can't just be a ladder, and once you get to the top, you stay there. You have to go up and down. So that's what we have. I know, Jackie, hopefully we have a couple good questions at this point, but let's move on to that.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm sitting with Hector over here, and he's still huffing and puffing. So I hope you guys enjoyed just watching those movements and different ways to progress that type of exercise using our IFT model and those primary movement patterns of the lunge and the hip hinge. So great job, Hector. And
Great work, buddy.
Thank you, Justin, for taking him through that. So yes, if you guys do have questions, we do have a live chat going on. So thank you, everyone, for commenting in and chatting right now. But if you have a question for Justin, be sure and type that in here. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and somebody had asked it earlier on the chat, was about one of the exercises, and I'll kind of just make this about all of the exercises, and making sure that whatever progression you do is appropriate for the client, obviously. So how might you, and I'll use the push-up as an example, the push-up progressions that we did earlier with the push-up, and it was the partner reach over the head. If you have someone with, let's say, neck issues or shoulder issues, but you also want to be getting into that thoracic spine mobility, what is maybe something that you can do with them that is a challenge or a different way to do that exercise if you have a client that has maybe some of those issues?
A very loaded question, but a great one.
Right.
So I would say with anytime there's, I'll give the PC answer and make sure they see a physical therapist first, or make sure they have doctor clearance. But if they're to the point where they're ready to exercise, they're ready to go, but they still have a little tweak, or they have concurrent issues that just haven't really gone away, you want to focus on the positive. So if they can't really rotate very well, can they laterally flex, or can they forward extend and flex that way? So you may, instead of doing 3 planes of motion, maybe you focus on 2 planes of motion with that. And then again, I would say in terms of the progression, add as much stability to the system, add as many helpers as you can. So if we're doing that partner push-up, I would probably have a tall box here, and maybe I would just start with us doing high fives from that stability type of position. And then I'd say, okay, let's go ahead and challenge. And if their neck kind of barks at them, then it's like, okay, guess what? That's what we're not doing today. So in your assessment, you have to figure out, and when, I said that point between failure and success, maybe it's not just they can't do it, maybe it's also they have pain. So for example, on a squat, old school strength coaches, butt to the floor, get as low as you can. And I think if you can do that with great form and no pain, absolutely. But maybe 90 degrees is that pain threshold for their knee injury. So you keep all your squats above 90 until they can progress without pain.
Great, perfect. Okay, so really just knowing the client and using that assessment, as you mentioned, as the exercise, and the exercise as the assessment all the time, right? Not getting to the ladder and then staying there at the top. So let's talk a little bit about those planes of motion, as you mentioned, and this was one of those 3D ways, one of the threes, of the 3 ways that you could change the type of movement pattern. So we did a little bit with the upper body, and then let's talk a little bit and maybe just talk more in depth about how changing in the sagittal plane with the hands and changing in the sagittal plane with the feet is a way to progress in that plane.
Great. So, and I do have to give credit where credit is due. A lot of what I've learned comes from the Gray Institute, as well as some of the ACE training. So being a gift fellow, this is where I got that training. But there are really 27 different foot or hand positions that you can do. You can modify The basic ones would be just that staggered stance here with your feet or your hands. In the sagittal plane, narrow or wide in the frontal, toes out or externally rotated, internally rotated with your hands or feet, and then you can combine those. So you could go left foot staggered, narrow, externally rotated, and do a squat here, or follow that up by push-ups.
Right.
So I would say what's challenging about it is that you're working some of the deeper muscles. So when we're talking about rotator cuff with the push-up, it's if you're used to doing a whole lot of push-ups, it's not necessarily a challenge. But now let's externally rotate the hands a little bit, and now all of a sudden that rotator cuff's kind of barking at you,
Right.
Hopefully in a good way.
Yeah.
But when you look at real life movements, they're not static. They're not in this machine-like environment. So getting those, in my opinion, makes it more truly functional, makes it more real life-like.
Great. So one of the ways that we can do that with our sagittal, transverse, and frontal planes is just by changing those hand positions.
Exactly.
And then those other 6 or 7 different ways that we can change that exercise. You mentioned the speed, and let's talk through some of those a little bit more in depth, because I think that's a good thing to be thinking about when we're putting this information into the IFT model, that we have our 5 primary movement patterns, but there are so many different ways that we can change them. So doing those 3 planes, and then as you saw with Hector, speed of movement.
Sure. So some of this is just your experience as a coach, and some of it is trial and error and figuring out what works and doing the wrong thing for many years and then correcting yourself. And this is definitely where the art comes in a little bit. So the first thing I would do is do your workouts before you do them with the client. Know what it feels like to do that frontal plane or that transverse plane lunge, and what's going on if your foot's going down and in or not staying glued to the ground. So that's my first tip with that, or how to figure it out, is try these out yourself and really figure it out that way. I would, as I said, I would start with stability and load would probably be the ones I would challenge first. Range of motion. I'd probably challenge those first. And again, you progress in one and then you kind of come back. So speed of movement and the chaos, I think that's more phase 3, phase 4, when a client is ready for it. Again, if we're looking at an ACL injury and somebody's doing that static lunge, I probably would not have them do a very fast lunge let me rephrase that. I would have them do a greater range of motion prior to speed.
To the speed,
So some of those variables, there's definitely overlap, but I'd say save speed and chaos for the end, stability, mobility, range of motion for the early parts of your tweaking or modifications.
Great, yeah. So if you have questions for Justin, if you'd like to continue the conversation, Justin is going to be on our ACE Facebook chat. So there is a live chat that is up right now. You can go to our ACE Facebook page and have a question for Justin. You can type it in there and continue the conversation. He'll be getting back to you over the next few days. So if you would like to receive a little bit more information, and you can check out a few different things. So we have some articles that were written by Justin, 4 exercises for stronger arms, and that goes into a little bit of the same concepts that we're talking about today, how to change and modify different more traditional exercises to get more bang for your buck and kind of challenge the client in different ways.
Exactly, and how to progress on the same equipment without introducing new equipment. So you're looking at what we have here, a suspension trainer, cords, medicine balls, kettlebells. You can do any of these progressions, any of these exercises.
Great. Another thing that you can check out is a certified article that we have on the IFT model and its effectiveness in training. So we use the IFT model as a basis and kind of that skeleton to set up your training programs. And then there's a little bit more information in that certified article, which you can see on your slide, about how to use that and how well it works when we're organizing our programs in that way. Just a reminder about how to get your CECs. Remember, you are watching today for free, so this is your time, and hope maybe you're taking a lunch break today in between clients, so we thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to receive CECs for today's presentation, the link is on your slide, acefitness.org/past webinars. It's also below in the description below the YouTube viewer, so you can purchase the CECs there. What you will receive in your My ACE account is the recorded version of today's presentation along with a quiz, and once you pass that quiz, you will receive 0.1 credits within your My ACE account. So feel free and check that out if you would like to receive CECs after today's presentation. Just a reminder, if you did miss anything today, you can just rewind on the viewer and check that out if you want to go back and see the exercises again or check out some of the slides one more time. Just a reminder that we have a great live class again coming up next month with Andrea Leonard, who is the cancer exercise specialist. She is going to be talking with us about working with cancer patients. So that is next month's live class. Justin, thanks for joining us very much. Yeah,
Hector,
and
nice
Hector,
work,
Hector's over here still recovering. Just a reminder, if you'd like to connect with us, a lot of different ways that you can connect with ACE. So feel free to let us know what you thought about today's live class. We look forward to the next one next month. And for more health and fitness information, feel free to visit us at acefitness.org, and let's keep people moving.
Thank you.